It's good to be back. Couple things on the materials I sent out for today. I included some notes from our last class in terms of the how-tos for the Amidah. Okay, so I included that at the beginning of the materials for today. Another couple other administrative things. We'll be continuing with this class, I'm guessing another 4 to 5 weeks. It was originally meant to be a 6-7 week. We're about 13, 14 weeks. And I'll keep going as long as I can. I'm finishing up a new unit on Hallel. I'm hoping to add by the time we get there. We have the Torah service to go. We have the Amidah to finish. So there's a number of things left to go through the service. The last thing is, and I know there's been some questions about the Sunday class that I'll be teaching starting this week. Essentially, it is a review of what we've done in this class. It was aimed at the people who could not do a weekday class. So this was opening it for them. Do I think that everybody remembers everything I taught in this class and it would be beneficial to do it again? I think so, because I don't remember everything I taught and I have to go back to my notes. Okay? And so if you have the opportunity, please feel free to join us again. The last piece is sometime around the middle of August. We're going to, for this year, obviously the high holidays are going to be, we don't know what they will look like. We do know they will look different. What different means, we don't know yet, but we know it will be different. And so we're going to expand a number of our opportunities, starting with the month of Elul. We're looking at, for example, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, the month before Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Chodesh also happens to be David Krohn's 36th double chai birthday, and he may do a concert that night. We'll get the information out. I'm also planning to teach 4 weeks on high holiday liturgy, 3 of which you may have attended in the past. I've done a session on Unatana Tokef. I've done a session on Kol Nidre. I've done a session on Ashamnu and Al Chet. I'll repeat those 3, and this year I'm adding a 4th on Nila. So we'll do 4 weeks of classes, and you're welcome to do that. So we're going to look at it, and we're looking to hopefully also have some kind of art project around the holidays. I'm looking for someone to do something where we can do it at home, and they'll give you the guidance on how we do it together, and we'll figure it out. So we're looking to make Elul a real entree, a vestibule into the high holiday experience. That's our goal. All right, enough administration. Let's pray. All right, we are up to the Amidah. We're going to look at the first 2 blessings of the Amidah today. The first 3 blessings are all blessings of praise. We tell God he's wonderful. We highlight all his wonderfulness and go from there. The first blessing deals with God in history. The second blessing, God in nature, the power. It's called Gevurot, powers of God in nature. So we need someone to read for us the English. We all sing. If any text you know in the Hebrew, this is probably one of them because we sing this all the time. Okay? But we need somebody to read it in English at the top. There we go. I'm looking for the Avot. Keep going. Go on. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There it is. There it is. Okay. So blessing number 1. All right, David, I see you. David Finge, would you do us the honors of reading the Praised Are You paragraph? You need to unmute. Are we having a problem there?
No, I've got it. You want me to read it in Hebrew or in English?
The English for now.
Okay. Praised are thou, our Adonai, our God, and God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, great, mighty, awesome, exalted God, who bestows love and kindness, creator of all. You remember the pious deeds of our ancestors and will send the Redeemer to their children's children because of your loving nature. You are the sovereign who helps and guards, saves and shields. Praised are you, Adonai, shield of Abraham and guardian of Sarah.
Okay, the first thing to note is I put in red here those sections that have been added to the text in terms of egalitarianism. All right, you won't find that in a traditional Siddur. So I just pointed that out so you have a sense of it's already been adapted from historical usage. This paragraph, and we'll go through sections of this one at a time, recognizes God as our God and the God of our ancestors. He uses the phrase that God is a great, mighty, revered, awesome, possessor of all. Okay, this is the phrase I like to call the God, gee God, your hair smells terrific. You are awesome. What a wonderful God you are. God, we ask God, the shield of Abraham, also to be our own shields. So that's the over framework of what's going on. Let's begin to take it apart a little bit. Obviously, we have here the mentioning of the Avot, the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then we added Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah. And the question is, why is such a formula used? Okay, in the biblical story, in Exodus, Moses says to God, what should I say when the people want to know who sent me to take them out of Egyptian slavery? And the Torah tells us that God's response is the following. Tell them that the Lord, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob sent me to you, and that shall be my name for all generations. Now, so a couple things on that. Number one is God self-identifies. What is God's name? He's telling Moses, this is a name for me. I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Okay, it's a self-identification. I do remember that when I spent a session with Rabbi Danny Gordis years ago, and he is an absolutely egalitarian, but he objects to adding the matriarchs here on the basis of God has given us a name. How dare we add to God's name? All right. There are other places to include women. This is the wrong place. This is a statement he made because God has identified himself, and we're changing God's self-identification. You don't have to agree or disagree to that, but I'm sharing that perspective. The question is, why do we use this formula today? And it has at least two important meanings. Number one, by looking back at our ancestors, we connect to our history. All right. It's sort of like looking at your own family photo albums. You look back on your family photo albums and you feel very differently than when you look at somebody else's family photo albums. We identify very strongly with our own. There's no question about it. I like to say to the kids when I teach them about Abraham, I want them to have that same identification they feel when they hear Abraham Lincoln. There's an importance to looking back and saying, that's my picture. That's my history. That's my connection. And so we identify strongly with his own past and our own history. You know, I had a parallel, opposite experience when I visited Spain years ago. I led a trip for the JCC in Dallas on a Jewish history tour of Spain. It's a misnomer. First of all, everything you see in Spain that is theoretically Jewish is now Catholic, and they tell you how it once was Jewish and the Jews gave it to us. Wasn't that nice of them? It's not quite an accurate portrayal. And the reality of it is, as you go through Spain and much of Europe, what you realize is that most of European history is Christian history. I can't fully identify with it because it's not me. That's how I came away from it. It's not that it's good, bad, or indifferent, but I didn't have the passion for it because it wasn't me. Instead, I hear stories of the Maccabees. I hear stories of the sages of the Talmud. I hear stories of those who suffered in the Crusades, those who perished in the Holocaust, those who helped build the state of Israel. I hear that. I hear Avotenu. I hear our ancestors, and I say, that's me. That's my family album. That's how I identify. So that's the first piece that's here. The second piece is, the question comes up, why does God say, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob? What's wrong with just saying I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Why do we have to repeat God of, God of, God of? What's that going on there? All right. So, of course, the rabbis had a comment. They always do. They see this. They say, oh, let's talk about this. And the basic idea is that every one of us has a different understanding of God. It's not that God is different. It's the lens with which we see God and understand God differs. And what this is saying is that the God of Abraham is how Abraham understood God. And the God of Isaac is how Isaac understood God, and the same thing for Jacob. That it is permissible and even natural for different people to have different ideas of God. Now, is that implied in the biblical story? Not necessarily, but it is an understanding that the rabbis give us, and it's how they want us to understand it here in the prayers, which are composed by men. Okay, for sure. All right, the next phrase, Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora. I always, when I do this, I emphasize these 4 words, all right? God is a great, mighty, and revered God. It occurs in context referring to the patriarchs and the covenant, and in the Bible, it's a number of places in Deuteronomy and Nehemiah, and so it's a natural phrase to use here. According to the Bible's, the understanding of the biblical use, these attributes, Gadol, Gibor, Norah, great, mighty, and revered or awe-inspiring, are in ascending order. Gadol is a general term. Lots of things can be great, can apply to anything. Gibor is applied to strong, mighty is applied to both human beings and God. And Norah, the sense of being revered or awe-inspiring, is reserved only for God. So you have this generic term, followed by something that can be applied to God or man, followed by something that only applies to God. You don't refer to people as Norah, as awe-inspiring, not in the same way. The other thing is Ha'el, all right? El in this phrase is we translate as God. Until this point, we've had Elohim is usually the word we use for God. In general terms, El is the word we use when we talk about God with a small g. There are gods, Elim, okay, in the ancient world, paganism. Elohim is generally referred to as God. It's the same root word, and in a sense, it's probably the plural in some way of God, of El. It's not uncommon, however, when you change a name from non-Jewish to Jewish to add the letter Hey to symbolize that transition. And good examples of that are Avram becomes Avraham and Sarai becomes Sarah. Both have a Hey added to their name, implying some level of distinctive Jewishness. Okay, so going from why is it not Elim? God is God. Instead of Elohim is the same Hey. It's the divine Hey, as we refer to it, that gets added to the name. The next label that's here, you have Ha'el, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanora. El Elyon, again, the El, God, okay, is God most high. Elyon is the heavens, the highest place you can go, up on top. When we say this, we're saying that God is greater than everything else, than all of the powers, that any terms we can use for God are beyond human comprehension and inadequate to truly understand God. And so therefore, this is sort of, as we often do when we list out qualities of God, it's sort of an etc., meaning there's no end to this list, and so we have to say etc. There's no list to the end list to the list, there's no end to the list of God's great qualities. And so there's this sort of El Elyon, above and beyond anything we can talk about. Yes, that's God too. Okay? Next, we have Gomel Chasadim Tovim. God does good deeds of loving kindness. So again, in the ancient world, they had the Gnostics who would say that God is good, great, powerful, and awesome, but he's also aloof from the world. He has better things to do with his time than to occupy himself with human affairs. God created, gave us a world that we can live in, and stepped away. This verse is suggesting otherwise, that part of God's greatness is his constant involvement in the loving kindness for human beings, that all that we need in the universe is here for us, and it's just a matter of human distribution of goods as opposed to the lack of goods in our universe. All right, now one can also, again, we always have the issue of what about when there's something missing, and that was the whole good, God is a creator of good and evil, and we can go back, not going back on that discussion, okay? But the emphasis here is that God is involved in the universe, and he does acts of loving kindness for us. Okay, Gomel Chasadim Tovim V'Konei HaKol. God is the owner of everything. V'Zocher Chazdei Avot. God is, we remember God's goodness to our ancestors. How do they translate it here? You remember the pious deeds of our ancestors. Okay, that works too. Because of the great deeds of our ancestors, we now appeal to God and say to him, help us. You're going to see two appeals at play here. We're turning to God and saying, help us in lots of ways. There are two appeals that will happen in this paragraph. The first is known as Zechut Avot, the merit of our ancestors. So Moses asked God to remember Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when he pleads with God not to destroy Israel on behalf of the golden calf actions. All right? The people don't necessarily deserve God's rewards, but remember their ancestry. Okay? Give them a break because of their ancestry. Now, again, it has to be qualified to some extent. Doesn't mean regardless of our own personal behaviors and beliefs that we can call on the lineage and do anything we want. Rather, we stand on our own personal merit. Nachmanides in the Middle Ages suggests that what this really means is that the spiritual path is open to God, happened because of our forefathers, and therefore it's an enabler for us to reach out and connect with God. It's sort of like having an in with a celebrity. You have to establish your own relationship with that celebrity, but knowing somebody can get you access is a good thing.
Cantor?
Yes.
Does it have to do anything with the skills, abilities, and talents of our ancestors that through the generations, those qualities have been inherited from each generation and passed down to them?
I'd like to think so.
Okay.
You know, I would like to believe so. You know, can I state that for sure? No, but I like that.
But did the rabbis ever think of it in that way?
Yeah, I do think that, you know, they do think that both good and bad qualities are descendant, and it's one of the reasons when they'll say we would reward and punish future generations. It's because there's an assumption that those behaviors continue on.
Okay.
So yes. All right, here we're focusing on all the positive qualities, and so yes, there is that sense that yes, hopefully we are in a sense showing that we value what our ancestors value.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I hope that kind of addresses it. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, so that's the first appeal. Okay. All right, so it's V'zocher Chazdei Avot, who, and we remember the good deeds of our ancestors, who Mavi Goel Ibnei V'nehem, and he brings redemption to the sons of their sons, the children of their children. Why? Here we go. L'ma'an Shemo, for the sake of his name. So now we have a second appeal. The first is the actions of our ancestors. The second is to say, God, you need to do this for your own name's sake, for your reputation. This again has biblical precedent. When God takes the Israelites out of Egypt, they receive the Torah. And shortly after, as I said to you, they make the golden calf and God wants to destroy them. Moses turns to God and says to him the following. This is reading number 1 here. So let's see. Suzanne, would you read reading number 1? You need to unmute. We can't hear you. All right. Rona, would you do it? Suzanne, you're unmuted. There you go.
Okay, there it is. If you destroy your people, what will the Egyptians and the other nations of the world say? They will say that you were strong enough to conquer the powers of Egyptian exile, but you were not strong enough to conquer the future lands of the land of Israel. That is why you destroyed your people in the desert.
Okay. Wow. Chutzpah. Okay. You know, God, your reputation's gonna suffer here. Look what people are gonna say. And again, by the way, a little bit later, God leads the Jews before he leads the Jews into Israel, the Jews insist on spying out the land to see whether or not they want to inherit it. And the spies come back and they report that they would not be able to conquer the land. They should not proceed to the land which God had promised them. And God turns around and says, I'm ready to destroy you. I've had it. You reject the land. There's no faith here. And Moses once again intervenes. And it says that if God were to destroy his people, same message. The nations of the world would say that you are not capable of bringing the Jews into the land of Israel. And they would contend that God, because he couldn't do that, came up with a scheme to get angry at the Jews so that he could destroy them in the desert. Moses was not short on chutzpah here, okay? He puts it to God pretty strongly. So we're turning to God. In the weekday Amidah, there's going to be this whole series of requests we're about to make. And so we begin by saying to God, you're awesome, you're amazing, you're wonderful, you provide for us, and we have lineage. And by the way, you want to do this for your own sake because of what people will say about you. Okay? That's paragraph number 1. Paragraph number 2. Let's go down a little bit to the Gevurot. Maya, if you're there, yeah. Okay, yeah, the English, there, good. All right, Rona, would you read us the English, your might?
Okay. Your might, Adonai, is boundless. You give life to the dead. Great is your saving power. And then the sees it all. You cause the wind to blow and the rain to fall. Your love sustains the living. Your great mercies give life to the dead. You support the falling, heal the ailing, free the fettered. You keep your faith with those who sleep in the dust. Whose power can compare to yours? You are master of life and death and deliverance. Faithful are you in giving life to the dead. Praised are you, Hashem, master of life and death.
So let me tell you that our prayer book has a terrible translation here. It's terrible on so many levels.
Okay.
Okay. Throughout this text, and I'll just point out, Michaye HaMeitim is presented to give life to the dead, master of life and death. The word chai is the root of Michaye, and Michaye is the causative form, who causes life, Meitim, to the dead. In other words, who resurrects the dead. They're going out of their way not to say that here, but that is exactly what is being said, and it's said 5 times. Okay, there is no more central message to with this paragraph than that. All right, I want you to know the Reform movement has completely rejected this concept, and they've changed the text. It doesn't say Michaye HaMeitim, who resurrects, who gives life to the dead. It says Michaye HaKol, which is a little bit closer, who gives life to everything, the source of life.
Reconstructionist prayer book did that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. That certainly would be a Kaplan thought, for sure. All right, so what's going on with this paragraph? We call this Gevurot, powers. The second blessing is referred to as powers. It celebrates God's power in nature, over nature, and in our lives. And so the first paragraph evidences God in history. This paragraph evidences God in nature, in our lives today. Okay, so those are 2 of the distinctions. It starts out with Atah Gibor Le'olam. Your God's power is forever. It doesn't wax and wane as does people's power. It is constant over time. God is a continual source of strength. All right, and the power over nature. It makes sense. Where would you put a line that says Mashiv HaRuach u'Morid HaGashem, who causes the wind to blow and the rain to fall, into a paragraph that talks about God's power over nature? Okay, so therefore that's why it gets added here. Okay. So the author is describing the wonderful power of God at work at all times in all of nature. God has given us everything we need: food, water, clothing, etc. And we see that as elaborating on God's loving kindness, his chasdei avot, his acts of loving kindness. With human beings, power is often defined in terms of one's ability to destroy. The most powerful people, the most powerful nations are those that can cause the greatest damage, lay waste to the greatest numbers, the ability to subdue, to imprison, to take away the freedom of others. In this text, God's power is described differently: upholding the fallen, healing the sick, freeing the slaves, giving life to the dead. These are all acts of gemilut chasadim, of kindness. And I'm going to get to the life to the dead, like giving life to the dead in a second. But it's important to note that much of the most dramatic evidence of God's power here is in more common everyday occurrences: supporting the fallen, those who are struggling, healing the sick, helping people have the energies and the strengths to heal. All right. And then our job, as the rabbis understood it, is to take those and to imitate them. All right. If God visits the sick, we visit the sick. If God takes care of the poor, we take care of the poor. If God frees the enslaved, we do our best to do the same thing. Okay. And so it's very important to understand that what we have here is a list. It's obviously a very partial list, but things that we are, by reading them, are reminding ourselves these are our obligations. Okay. One rabbi offers us a look at it in the following way. He says, those who seek God in prayer and in their deeds will receive strength to serve God further. It's just by the process of seeking it, we are further empowered. God doesn't necessarily have to do anything. He's built into us this given that we are empowered by it. In other words, God helps those suffering by inspiring them to new strengths and determination. Okay? Alternatively, one can also understand this as God is the source of knowledge, all knowledge, and our job is to study and learn to heal. So God's healing can be seen in the hands of doctors. God's healing can be seen in the hands of politicians who help the world. That God, again, so our job is, we refer to God in the weekday Amidah. I talked about this on Shavuot. You, God, grant us wisdom, knowledge, discernment. You are the source of those. It's our job to take them and act godly. Okay? All right, let's get to the fun stuff. The ultimate display of God's power is the ability to conquer death. Okay? That's what you've got going on here. That's why it's mentioned here. God can do all of these things, but at the end of the day, if you want to see the ultimate power, it's God's power in the long term over death. So let's talk a little bit about that. Everyone is curious and interested to know about the afterlife and if it exists at all. By the way, by the end of this, I'm not going to be able to tell you absolutely. Just be aware, okay? I'm going to give you a Jewish tradition, but I haven't been there and back. If we were sure that there is life after death, many of us would behave quite differently. If it could be proven there is no afterlife, believers would also change their behaviors, okay? Without a life beyond this world and a promise of rewards of some sort, there's little reason not to live it up, okay? We might behave quite differently. So the entire question of morality, reward and punishment, and why bad things happen to good people would become almost impossible to have a discussion on if there's nothing beyond, because then the world doesn't make sense. The very purpose of humanity's existence is tied to this question. And so let me just say to you up front, like most major religions, Judaism emphatically believes in an afterlife, but that character of that existence is unique to Judaism, okay? In very broad strokes, I'm going to give you a very broad stroke overview. Jews came to believe that at the end of days, at some ultimate time, the dead will be resurrected and come before God to account for their lives here on earth. Okay? That the righteous will be rewarded and the evil punished. That the Jews, free from the yoke of exile, will return to their homeland, rebuild it, and become masters of their own destiny. That they will rebuild the temple and reinstitute the temple cult, the sacrificial system. That the nations of the world will flock to study Torah with the Jewish people. That peace and justice will rule, the tensions that pervade the world will disappear, the lion will lie down with the lamb. All right. I think I've mentioned this once before. My rabbi in Dallas had the answer to that. You just get a new lamb every day. It's very easy. Okay. And finally, this entire scenario will be brought to pass through the initiative of a charismatic human figure called the Mashiach, literally the one who is anointed. All right? Anointed in the same term that King David was anointed, the same term that the priests were anointed. This is a human being. This is a total misunderstanding within Christianity of what Mashiach as really means as Messiah. Okay? That's the overview of what will happen. So I want to take you back a little bit. Okay? Let's go back to the Bible. You are going to hate the Bible's understanding of the afterlife. You're going to hate it. The most common biblical name for what is the land of deepest gloom, where Job anticipates going after his death, is Sheol. This is the term that appears throughout the Bible. Sheol. It is the netherworld. It is the bowels of the earth. It is the pit. It is the limit of human awareness. It's a metaphor for God's ultimate mystery. The Bible gives us some vivid descriptions of Sheol. Its gates and bars make escape impossible. It's described as a monster with gaping jaws that aggressively devours all men and is never sated. It is a place of maggots and decay. Okay? Not lovely. To claim that the dead go down to Sheol is to say that they descend to the bowels of the earth beyond the bounds of human awareness. Now, this is key. The dead lose any possible relationship with God, with the living, with other inhabitants of Sheol, and with anything transpiring on earth. They lose all connections to everything, including God, until the resurrection. Oh, no, I'm sorry. There is no resurrection in the Bible. This is death in the biblical perspective. And it doesn't discriminate between good and bad people, the righteous and the evil, because Jacob also is sent to Sheol. None of this is appealing. You can understand why over time it disappeared. It's not exactly a draw to Jewish thought. There's one biblical text that is cited as supporting a claim that that resurrection entered up into biblical literature at an early date. That text is Ezekiel 37. In it, the prophet's vision of dry bones. You may have heard that term. The vision of dry bones are that this being is clothed with flesh, infused with breath, and brought back to life. The problem is, and we'll read it here in a second, the key to understanding this passage lies in God's own interpretation of the prophet's vision. All right, so let's see. All right. Rosalind, would you read reading number 2? Wait, hold on. You need to we need to get you unmuted first. Yeah. We still don't have you unmuted. We're having problems with the system somehow. I've learned that they've deliberately made it difficult for the host to unmute because this way people can't be unmuted against their will. So this is a new thing that Zoom has done. We've looked into it. Andy Hoffman wrote them a letter to get some information, and that's what we discovered.
Interesting. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
O mortal, these bones are the whole house of Israel. They say, our bones are dried up, our hope is gone, we are doomed. Prophesy therefore, and say to them, thus says the Lord God, I am going to open your graves and life you out of the graves, O my people, and bring you to the land of Israel.
Okay. So what you have here is a vision of bones that assume flesh and live again. But it's clear at the same time that it's a metaphor for the national regeneration of Israel. This is about the exiles returning to the land. It's God's power to bring the people out of Babylonian exile. It's as if they are dead and are being brought back to life as a people. It's a return to their homeland. It is a political statement, not a prophecy of bodily resurrection. Okay? So to use this as a proof text that the Bible had an idea of resurrection is misguided. That's not the intention. The text itself tells you what it's about. All right, let's keep going. I see some people writing, so I'm going to give you a second. So if we were to speculate on why does the Bible insist upon the finality of death for human beings, that absolute finality, there are two answers that are possible. The first is the Bible's generalized injunction against imitating idolatrous practices of the surrounding pagan religion. You understand that they lived among the Egyptians for sure. And the Egyptians are a very death-focused way of life. You know, when somebody dies, they take everything with them. The king died, he took they buried all his possessions, they buried his live wife with him. He took everything. Okay? And this may be a way of saying we are not pagans. The second may lie in the biblical insistence in preserving a sharp demarcation between God and human beings. Only God is immortal, humans cease. There was an ancient understanding that 1,000 years was the equivalent of eternity. 1,000 years. It is not an accident that if you go back to the creation story, the oldest person, Methuselah, or Methuselah as we call him in modern parlance, lives to 990.
Oh.
He doesn't make it to 1,000. Okay? Nobody gets eternity, is what the message of the Bible is. And that's a way of saying, you're not God. Get over it. All right, that's not where we're ending. That would be very depressing.
Yes.
All right, so that the death of each human being in final, that God has no power over our destiny after death, is the overwhelming testimony of the Bible. But as the biblical age comes to a close, two doctrines enter into Jewish writings which overturn that belief. One is that at some future point, God will raise at least some human bodies from their graves. There'll be a resurrection. The second is that the human body is mortal, but that every human being possesses a soul, which separates from the body at death and enjoys a continued existence with God. There's an important statement there. Prior to this, the idea of a soul doesn't exist. There is no soul. When you die, you die. That's the biblical understanding. There's no soul. Nephesh in the Bible is used to mean a life, a person. Modern Hebrew, it's different. But in the Bible, there is no soul. There is no resurrection. You die, you're gone. Introduced at a later point, human beings will be resurrected. A soul exists and it separates at death. Okay? These two doctrines eventually merge and form the core of Jewish doctrine of the afterlife, and it becomes canonical. But this is basic Jewish thought from the age of the Talmud on. Okay? Maimonides in the 11th century teaches that bodily resurrection will be temporary and will be followed by eternal life for the spirit of the righteous. So there is a soul, and he makes it one of his 13 principles and says that the only ones who will be denied this afterlife are those who don't believe in the afterlife. So he's making it absolute. So clearly, by the time we get to the rabbis of the Talmud, and even later with Maimonides, the biblical view is gone. Thank God. So the question is, where does this come from? And again, two possible facts. Before, let's see, after when the exile starts, the Jews are sent to Babylonia. Babylonia is conquered by the Persians. We're talking the 4th and 5th century before the Common Era, before Alexander the Greek conquers the Persians. During this time, Persian influence has a major impact on Jewish life. Persian influence, they believed in this afterlife concept. The Zoroastrian texts taught the idea of judgment, that the righteous shall be resurrected. And so you can see the influence on Judaism. But by the way, you also see it. Look at the timing. It's 400 or 500 years, 300 or 400 years before the Common Era. Judaism takes this. Christianity really takes it and runs with it. Because they're taking it from the Jews who took it from the Persians. Right? Not an accident. So it's very likely that it's a Persian belief. Now, equally consider, would a theologian say to you, a traditional theologian say to you, yeah, we were influenced by the Persians? The answer is no. Here's where they would come down on it, okay? It's a natural development of ideas. If God created the world and humanity in the first place, if God is the ultimate force whose power extends over all of nature and history, if God can send Israel into exile and then redeem it again, if God can renew the natural cycle of each year, and if God can, as Isaiah 66 promises, create a new heaven and earth, then, okay, we have an if then why can't God raise human beings from the grave? Why can't God, in the words of Isaiah 25:8, destroy death forever? Why should God's power over one's fate end with death? Why is death more powerful than God? Okay, and the rabbis canonize this concept by its inclusion in the Gevurot. They take the most fundamental of prayers, the prayer, Hatfilah, and put this right smack in the opening sections of it and say, this is critical. So for a few minutes, what I want to do is open the floor, because this is, we all struggle with these issues. I may not have answers, but I think it's important to do that. So Maya, if you would unmute people, and if we can just sort of make sure we're taking turns as much as possible. You may need to unmute yourself as well.
Two comments, Rabbi, Cantor, rather.
Yeah.
One in relationship to the hay, in the beginning where they talk about Ha'el, Hagadol.
Not that hay. That's not the hay. That hay is the. I'm
Okay.
talking about within a name. When a name changes, they add a hay. So Avram becomes Avraham. There's an H added, a hay.
Yeah, because
Sarai becomes Sarah. So it's not Ha'el Hagadol. That's just the, emphasizing that it's the definitive.
right, that's what I was going to say, that
Okay.
refer to that. Second comment, in the Shechianu, Shechianu actually means renewing life, bringing us back to life.
Well, it's Shehecheyanu. The Cha here is Chai. It's just that the vowels change because of the grammatical structure. And it becomes, again, a causative. It's who causes life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that it necessarily refers to a restoring of life. It's just causing life. It's the source of life. Okay?
Okay.
Right. Anybody else?
Yes,
Sandy.
Cantor?
Betty.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Good.
I'm going back to the Avot.
Yes.
And the part where it says, we'll send a redeemer to their children's children.
Mhm.
So this is, to me, kind of like I hate to say it, but almost like an excuse. We don't have the Moshiach now, but if he or she will come sometime in the future, you know, like we don't know when, we don't know how, but
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
So
So you don't like the fact that there's a non-absolute here.
yes.
All right. I want you to remember that the prayers are clearly man-written. This is not God. Okay. The liturgy, no one makes the claim that the Siddur is God's words. There are places where we add God's word text from the Bible, but the liturgy is man. And so since we don't have answers, you're right, there's a qualification here. There's a we don't know when. And by the way, the rabbis of the Talmud struggled with the same thing. They even suggested that, many of them suggest it's forbidden to try and figure out when the Messiah will come. Because every time we do, Jews get disappointed and people leave God. So therefore, don't engage in that kind of shenanigans. That hasn't stopped Jews from doing it, but the rabbis of the Talmud are against it in general. Yeah, it is qualified.
So, excuse me, are you saying that we should not try to deal with it? I mean, kind of like try and set it aside?
No, I'm saying we should live our lives as if when we need this moments of healing, as if the Mashiach is on the horizon. But to absolutely be able to say it is, you know, what did the Jews of the Holocaust do? It may have been a source of hope, but it doesn't mean it will actually happen in our lifetimes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Sandy, you had your hand up.
But just a comment, in the most recent, or at least the most recent that I've seen in the pews of Reform synagogues here, they have added back in brackets after Hakol the Mahaye Meitim.
Yeah.
Which is, I guess, part of the process of at least some Reform synagogues sort of leaning back toward tradition.
Yeah, there is. By the way, I want you to know that this concept, that even within conservative Judaism, is difficult. And so I was able to witness two of our pillar theologians, Neil Gilman and Elliot Dorff. They each run the theological departments at the seminary and the UJA. Okay, they're good friends. But I watched an incredible debate in which Dorff said, "I don't buy it," and Gilman said, "Absolutely." As a matter of fact, Gilman has written a book called "The Death of Death." That ultimately God's power will be seen through the destruction of death. There is a struggle. Look, as I said to you before, as I can't tell you, none of us can tell you absolutely. All right? And what gives people the freedom, in a sense, to do this is you have one biblical view and then you have a rabbinic view, and they're not the same. Okay? And so we don't have, it's rare that the Bible and the rabbis don't necessarily agree. This is one of those rare cases. Of course, I'm sure someone could say to you, we'll find out when they do agree, we'll just find out when the Messiah comes. That's one answer to everything. I don't buy it. All right, because I do believe that the Talmud is contextualized in its time, that it's not given at Sinai. So, my view is different. Don't have an answer. All right, so one more piece I'll give you. It is not mainstream in the least. There is a Jewish understanding of reincarnation. The Gilgulim, these sort of cycles that happen, that souls return in different bodies in different ways until there's some sort of repentance that goes on. It exists. It's mostly Hasidic in general. It is certainly not mainstream Jewish thought. It is not, it would be more Hasidic and not Mitnagdim. The traditionalists of scholars would not necessarily accept it. But it implies, for example, they would say to you that if somebody behaves like an animal, it's because they were an animal in a previous life. If a woman is barren, it's because she was a man in a previous life. I'm not buying that personally. I'll share with you, I'm not buying it. I think it's very, I find it almost comical. I understand what could lead to those kinds of that kind of thinking in what essentially is magical thinking. In a world of the Middle Ages where magical thinking was very common. It wasn't just, it was common to people in general. And that's the world in which the Hasidim lived. And it's also a world in which Hasidim, as a general rule, arose at a time when things were so terrible and that the world in such was so awful and had so little hope for redemption that they turned inward and found joy in inward ways because the outer world was hopeless. In that world, a kind of, and I'm not using magical in a nasty way. It was common to middle-aged thinking. Okay, this was the way the world thinks. If you watch any middle-aged television show, you'll see it play out. Witches and it's all common middle-aged thinking. Right? The same way we bought Persian thought on certain things, they bought the thinking of the world in which they were living. It's a normal borrowing. Doesn't mean we have to accept it in the modern world. Okay. Wow. So now, when you say the Amidah, look what you have to think about. God in history, God in nature, God's power over everything, God's role, our identity with our past, our family photo album, essentially. That's all brought to the mind by the first two paragraphs of the Amidah. All right. So let's one more time unmute if there are any other questions. All right. All right, so next week we're going to continue on with Kedusha, which is the third blessing of praise. And then we'll look at how the rest of the Amidah breaks down. And then over the next couple of weeks, we'll start to look at the Torah service and Hallel as well. All right. I believe that tomorrow will come out. For those of you who want to rejoin the classes we start again on Sunday, the materials will come out as a link tomorrow again in the newsletter. By the way, I do know that for the Sunday class, I'm going to have at least 8 or 10 people from around the country. I have students of mine from when I was a kid who are now 52 and are joining us. Nomi Branchik is up in Toronto. She'll be joining us. So it's nice. We'll have people from all over the place who are going to come and join us, and we'll get different insights and different understanding. Some of the people I haven't seen in 30 years, I'm very interested in seeing their faces. If we could unmute, whatever, that's also good.
Like a high school reunion.
So, what's that? Yeah, well, yeah, not quite high school, but close. Yes, yeah, close. Yeah, I was 22. One of the students that's coming, I was a 22-year-old Cantor when she was in my class.
Wow.
40 years ago. Yes, 40 years. So.
Wonderful technology.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Indeed.
A
good day, a good Shabbat.
Agreed.
In Nancy's class. In her
I can hear
mountain
you,
class.
Ron.
Thank
What's
you.
that?
Thank you very much, Cantor. Wonderful class.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very